Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Hampton. I use any pronouns, and I'm a political science and planning public policy and management double major with minors in legal studies, nonprofit administration, and writing, public speaking, and critical reasoning. Today, I'll be presenting my thesis titled Queering the Way, Investigating the Link Between LGBT plus Advocacy and Policy Advancement. I wrote this thesis last term under the guidance of my two advisors, Dr. Allison Gash, an associate professor in the Department of Political Science, and Dr. Diana Mason, an associate professor in the School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management. I also owe special thanks to the Wayne Morse Center for Law and Politics for their support during this process as well. So, some background on my thesis. This is really centered in the modern LGBT plus rights movement. And what got me interested in looking into this was because the LGBT plus rights movement in the US since the late 60s has made great strides in winning equal rights for queer Americans with things like marriage equality, employment discrimination being outlawed, and family law changing to recognize queer families. Representing rights wins for queer people all across the country. However, in recent years, thanks to, in part, the Trump administration, there's been a backlash against LGBT rights wins. And in 2022 alone, there are close to 250 anti-LGBT plus bills introduced across nearly every state. Most of them are targeting trans people. And that's something you can track on the Equality Federation's website. So my research question was, in the LGBT plus rights movement, what advocacy strategies have worked to create political and social change? And then how can their success be replicated for current and future rights battles? Essentially, I want to see what worked, how did marriage equality, for example, or employment discrimination get passed, and then how can those strategies be applied not only to future LGBT rights fights, such as transgender equality, but also to civil and political rights movements more broadly. And to do this, I used primarily two theories that are intrinsically linked to sort of guide my thinking here. And I started with political opportunity theory, which was posited by Douglas McAdam. And that theory posits that there are moments where political institutions are most receptive to change, with various conditions needing to be met. And those conditions include events that expand political opportunities, like if you think of the George Floyd protests, like the murder of George Floyd sort of springboarded that and created those political opportunities. Number two, access to resources and networks for activists and insurgents, as McAdam calls it. And three, having a critical mass of support will create enough pressure on the outside to promote change on the inside, so to speak. And then legal opportunity structure was developed by Ellen Anderson, sort of in response to political opportunity theory, but applying that to the judiciary, because a lot of LGBT rights cases or wins rather have been a result of lawsuits, litigation. So with legal opportunity structure, it's basically all the conditions of political opportunity theory need to be there, but the defendant also needs to frame their political goal within a judiciable question. So they need to identify some constitutional right that they can stand behind to push their goal through. So how did I go about answering these questions using this framework? I primarily used qualitative methods, those being interviews. So I went to my advisors and I asked them for help to connect me to some advocates with experience with campaigns and nonprofits and government work at local, state, and federal levels to get some insight into their experience, the work they've done, things that they notice have worked, haven't worked, things that are working, are not working, And I ended up talking to 6 very lovely individuals, those being Diego Sanchez, who works at PFLAG, but also spent time on Capitol Hill as the first transgender senior policy advisor for a member of Congress. Vivian Topping, who works at the Equality Federation, managing different campaigns. Evan Wolfson, who founded Freedom to Marry, which was a nonprofit that had a pivotal role in the movement for marriage equality in the US. Brian Bond, who's the current executive director of PFLAG and also worked under the Obama administration. Rebecca Dinwiddie, who is here at the University of Oregon, who also has experience at Basic Rights Oregon, which is a state nonprofit that did a lot of work for passing marriage equality and family equality. And Candace Gingrich, who is Newt Gingrich's half-sibling, who spent over a decade at the Human Rights Campaign managing resources and interns, in addition to other things. And these interviews, they lasted between 30 and 60 minutes, and they were done over Zoom. And they were really insightful. I had a really nice time listening to these queer elders and all the work they did. And it was really, I already said insightful, but it bears repeating, to hear the campaigns that they worked on, things that were successful or not successful, hearing, in their opinion, things that are necessary to put a policy goal forward, or things that aren't necessary. And these are the conclusions I came to. So things that are more broadly applicable to advocacy campaigns or movements. So an advocacy campaign needs adequate time, money, labor, unity, allies, and democracy in a democratic environment. And what counts as adequate sort of depends on the scale of the campaign. A local campaign doesn't need as many resources as a national campaign, for example. And having a strategy going in, so a clear goal and an idea of what method you're going to use to get there. So are you going for a law to be passed or for a judge to make a certain decision? There are different things you need to do to get to each place. And it's also helpful for mobilizing people around it to get people on the same page and build that critical mass. Additionally, having trust between insiders and outsiders with governmental institutions is crucial to ensure synergy between the two sides. So you need to have supporters on the same page, but you also need to have people inside the government on the same page too. So they know what you're after and they know how bad you want it. And so you can work together to make it happen, because if you don't have allies on the inside, then nothing will happen unless you use force, which would represent a breakdown of democratic institutions and norms. And then within the LGBT rights movement, examples of successful advocacy strategies employed include using personal narratives. Using personal narratives, telling stories of queer Americans and their lives, their hardships, their successes, helping people change their minds about queer people. And this includes legislators, changing legislators' minds to make it less nebulous and scary and more grounded in reality and normalized. Like, oh, my neighbor is queer and that's cool. And you get it. And having a strong and clear public education campaign to dispel myths about LGBT plus people. This is something that's coming up a lot in regards to trans individuals. A lot of myths about trans people attacking people in bathrooms, for example, or cheating in varsity sports. These are myths, and having public education campaigns to counteract that and get people course corrected will help them better, if not support LGBT rights, at least understand why others support it. And distributing resources to individuals that need them. So and groups too, like universities, LGBT groups on college campuses are pretty crucial at doing advocacy work, mobilizing people, building community, all of that, and participating in acts of civil disobedience as necessary. So this could include protests. Like the history of the Pride parades, they started as acts of civil disobedience to get people's attention and put queer people on the map, because before that they were ignored. And reflecting on this experience, it was really transformative in my thinking, because it basically gave me a roadmap for what I want to do with my future. As a queer person who has had advocacy experience, I work at the Queer Resource Center on campus, and I'm interested in going into policy work or nonprofit work to promote LGBT rights. This was really pivotal in that experience. And hearing knowledge from queer elders and professionals fighting for our rights for decades was really rich and rewarding, and encouraging to me that every little bit of support, it counts, and it's going towards something. And the fight is always worth it, because we've already overcome so much. And there is enough momentum that backsliding all the way back is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to answer any other questions you have about this project, this thesis. And I thank you for your time.